A very warm welcome to episode 31 of the MotorMouth podcast. We're recording this on Wednesday, the 10th of June. Before we introduce today's guest, I want to remind you guys that we have an app and we have a website, and we've just made some updates, so go check it out. Search MotorMouth on your app store or visit motormouth.club. You can join up, make a profile, start following other folks, and check out the latest racing news, opinion pieces, and exclusive MMTV videos featuring the ugly mug of my cohort, Harry, which are all now up and running on the app, so go and have a look. With that said, I now have to dive through the World Wide Web to link up with my trusty, tall, talented, talkative and tenacious co-host, Harry Benjamin. How are you?
I'm very well, Tim. Thank you as ever for the very glamorous and luxurious introductions. I'm doing well, back in the cupboard. I really have to slouch in here to fit in this suitcase cupboard, but it works well for the audio quality. All good. It's just getting on with life, really. But I mean, it's you that's got the big news coming.
Yes, well, if I disappear at any point during this recording, you know why, because due date for Sylvie Baby number 3 is less than 72 hours away. So it's all go. And
if that door behind you flies open any minute,
I'm out. I'm tapping out. You'll just have to carry on your own. With that said, shall I bring in today's guest?
Absolutely.
So Steve Ryder is one of the UK's most recognised and loved sports, and more importantly to us, motorsport presenters. He's hosted basically everything, every sport ever, including the Olympics, Grandstand, Sports Personality of the Year, rugby, and of course our beloved Formula One. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Steve Ryder to the MotorMouth podcast. Steve, how are you doing?
Very well indeed, and good luck to you. I'll be brief because obviously your attention is elsewhere. No, I wish you all the best with that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's number 3. It's going to be chaotic in this household.
Yeah, do not envy you one bit. But Steve, welcome to the MotorMouth podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. So first off, we're all in sort of whatever you call it these days, semi-lockdown, half lockdown, whatever you want to label it. How have you been getting on with life in this new world?
Yeah, fine. It's. I wouldn't say it is a huge difference from my normal schedule, because ever since I became a freelance broadcaster, you always work from home or you work from location, and if programs aren't happening, then there's no need to go to race circuits or studios or so on. So I work from here. I mean, not this room in particular, because we can't get a signal out of my study, but I'm used to working at home and can work around it. The frustrating thing is the number of offices that are closed down and the normal, routes of communication are a struggle. But we're getting through it. We're nearly there, I think.
Have you been missing racing? Are you excited to get back towards the end of this year?
Yeah, it's. For me, the schedule, I say, is only these days, but it's the British Touring Car Championship. We were on the very brink of the first race before lockdown started. We'd done the pre-season stuff, and we were up at Silverstone and so on, and then the curtain came down. But all credit to TOCA. They've really got their act together in conjunction with ITV, and we do seem to have a fairly touchwood bulletproof schedule for getting the thing back on the road at the beginning of August. Much can happen between now and then, but we're looking very carefully at what happens with other sports and with Formula One in particular. But hopefully we'll be back in action in August.
Good to hear. Now listen, before we touch on British touring cars and other parts of your career, let's wind the clock back a bit. So take us back to young Steve. I'm talking very young Steve. Where was home when you were growing up as a child, and what hints were there for what was to come for you? Was there any indication that you would end up in the broadcasting world and the sporting world? And take us back to those days.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's my passport says I was born in Dartford, and probably Wikipedia says I was born in Dartford. I've never been to Dartford in my life. I was born in Dartford.
It does say that on Wikipedia, by the way.
In Dartford Nursing Home, and no, I grew up in southeast London, around Charlton and Blackheath and that sort of area. And as for indications of what was to come, I played a bit of football in my youth and a bit of cricket, none of which was to any high standard. But I had a bit of the gift of the gab, and I could write a bit. So when I left school on the Friday and joined the local newspaper in southeast London on the Monday as a sports reporter, largely covering football. I was covering Charlton and Millwall and Crystal Palace. And there was no sort of real indication that broadcasting was going to be a route, because back then, and I shudder to say it, this was 1968. Local radio hadn't really started, let alone anything else. So there was no assumption that the broadcasting could be a possibility. But then when that eventually came on stream, I did a few things. When London Broadcasting started, I was one of the first in the door and working for the sports team there. And that's when the broadcasting side started. And, like everyone else, you struggle in the first 6 months. But the great thing was that, with a fledgling broadcast operation like LBC, everyone was experiencing it for the first time. So we all learned together. And, there were some significant names who came through it as well from that era. John Snow was one, Peter Allen, and so on. And that was me off and running. Do you want me to carry on with the David Copperfield stuff? I mean, I go on for a bit of it.
I'm curious with the football stuff. Who's your team?
Growing up just up the hill from the valley, I'm a Charlton man.
Okay.
And I was, my one claim to fame is that, I played for Charlton Reserves once.
Oh, very good.
As a goalkeeper. You say very good. It was only because I was covering them and they were a man short.
Let's talk about being versatile.
Yeah, this we're not talking Liverpool or United here. But I've got a picture which I should have brought out for you, but it's when I was at the local paper, we had a goalkeeper at Charlton named Graham Tutt who got a very bad eye injury and he had to sadly retire from the game. So we staged a testimonial for him at the Valley. He got the injury up at Sunderland. So we brought the Sunderland team down to play in this testimonial, got 19,000 there. And the preamble was a little match against the Variety Club or the Showbiz team or whatever they called themselves. But who was going to play them? So we decided to put together a team just of London goalkeepers, all playing out on the field. And you had Bob Wilson, you had Pat Jennings, you had Peter Panetti, all out on. Alex Stepney played, a young Mervyn Day, and so on. And the unanimous vote was I should go in goal. And we had 18,500 there, and I was behind this, stellar lineup of, the best goalkeepers in the world, effectively. I conceded 3 goals from Bill Oddie alone.
Oh, that's not good.
it was the end of my career, but
oh, short-lived. How tall are you, by the way? I mean, you don't strike me as 6'5". I might be wrong.
Yeah, I'm sitting down. I'm about 6'5". Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that.
6'5", yeah, same.
5'8", I think, but still great.
I mean, not necessarily the correct stature for a goalkeeper, but
I was about half the height of every outfield player. No,
I can tell you right now, being 6'5" does not make you a good goalie. I was awful in goal. I retired from the B team under 12 football team at school. That was my last outing as a goalie. I was absolutely dreadful. And I'm 6'5" with size 16 feet. You'd think I'd make a decent goalie, but no.
Yeah, well, you couldn't get down to the low shots. I couldn't get up to the high ones. Between us, we
could have managed between us. Yeah. Well, that's a great insight into how it sort of started. And then where did the switch over to being in front of the screen and beginning to broadcast on TV come about?
Well, that was 1977. I was working at LBC. I still had very little to do with motorsport because motorsport and radio weren't a natural fit. And in 1977, a job was advertised in television. I mean, it just doesn't happen these days. At Anglia Television, they were looking for an assistant sports editor.
Oh yeah, that building's still going strong, I think, as well. In Norwich,
the building, the old post office building in Norwich, is still there, but it contains very little of Anglia Television. So I applied for this job, and we had. And it got down to a short list of 3 or 4. I can't remember who the 4th one was. But the rest of the short list was Alan Parry, who commentator on Sky still. Tony Adamson, who went on to present the radio coverage of Wimbledon. And myself. And I was lucky enough to get the job. And so started in television. And that really is where the motorsport came in, because being based at Norwich, I mean, you had great football stories to tell as well. But to go out with a film camera to places like Silverstone and in particular Snetterton, you realised, how much depth there was to an average race meeting, how many human stories there were to be told. It wasn't sort of the one-dimensional football coverage and so on. And I grew to get more and more involved in what was happening with the bikes and the cars at Snetterton. And of course, down the road also, you had Lotus, Ketteringham Hall, and 77, 78, Colin Chapman, Mario Andretti, Ronnie Peterson, and we started to do more and more work with the team and developing programming with the team. I wouldn't say I got to know Colin Chapman well, but you're able to have some fairly sort of privileged access. And with all that sort of raw material, it was hard not to become a motorsport fan, and that really is where it all began.
Were you a motorsport fan prior to that, or was that where it kicked it off, the interest?
That's where it kicked it. I mean, you were aware, but living in Southeast London, you were conscious that something was going on at Crystal Palace and so on, and you could occasionally hear the helicopters going over to Brands Hatch and so on. I was thinking the other day, the first motorsport experience I suppose I had was when living in Southeast London. My brother and I went to, I think we entered as the Cub group, the Cub pack we were in. There was a soapbox derby in a park in Erith, and this will be about 1955, 6, I suppose. And the one thing I remember was that the guest of honour who was presenting the prizes was Stuart Lewis-Evans,
right?
The driver who was later to lose his life in Morocco. And I've often thought, for some reason, I remember Stuart Lewis-Evans being there as being the first racing driver I'd ever met. But the weird thing about that was that you think, well, if Stuart Lewis-Evans was there, Bernie Ecclestone must have been right alongside, because Bernie was his manager. And I thought, well, that's a weird thing to look back on.
Wow.
Getting a prize in a soapbox derby in 55 from Bernie Ecclestone was now it's all come full circle now.
It's a shame you just don't get those kind of stories these days, I don't think. But, going up through the ranks in broadcasting and dipping your toe into, pretty much every sport that was coming your way, did you have anyone that you particularly admired growing up and who wanted to sort of either, never copy, but someone, was a bit of a hero to you?
Well, there were lots in broadcasting terms.
Or other.
I mean, there were lots of people that you wanted to, that you admired their approach, and David Coleman was the particular presenter in my era. The great radio voices of the time we loved to emulate as well. Peter Jones, Ken Wolstenholme, and all those sort of never coming close. And then Des Lynam was just sort of starting out his career at around the same time, and clearly had something that nobody else had. But no, it was just, being fortunate enough to be around, and this would come later when I went to the BBC, some of the legendary names of sports broadcasting. And, it's hard not to learn a lot. But at Anglia, you just did your own thing, really. We weren't legends.
Trial by fire.
We weren't legends. We were, oh God, there's some of the stuff that we had to work on. I mean, it was great because you had Norwich City with John Bond, and you had Bobby Robson down at Ipswich and so on. But I remember we had the Peterborough Dyke jumping championships we had to do as well. things like it was.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, no, it's probably very.
People love a bit of dyke jumping
these days, but it's
yes.
it seemed to work in East Anglia anyway. But it's
so moving forward through into the 80s, ITV, Moscow Olympics. That must have been a break and a very interesting experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, it was, and it was a complete surprise because I'd been at Anglia about 2.5 years, and just sort of scrabbling around learning the trade as a regional broadcaster. And then in 1980, ITV had the Olympics along with the BBC, and in those days, ITV was a conglomeration of about 16 companies. You had TV South, and you had Granada, and you had Central and Anglia, and everyone else. So they had to sit down and organize who from which company was going to do everything. And the meetings went on for about a month, and who was going to be chief engineer, who was going to direct this, who was going to do that. So there was a wonderful guy who used to run ITV in those days, John Bromley. And now he was a legendary guy that you learned lots from. And he got to the end of his tether and he said, right, who's going to present it? And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, let's have somebody that no one's heard of. And then, there can't be any argument. And he rang up Anglia Television and, who have you got? Who have you got? And he said, well, Steve Ryder is our chap. He's been here a couple of years. Tell him he's presenting the Olympics. And that was it. And
wow.
And off I went. Things evolved from there because I was due to be part of the presenting team in Moscow, but then came the 1980 boycott. So they moved a part of the presentation back to London. So Dickie Davis stayed in London, and I became the presenter in Moscow. And, I'd never done anything on the network before. And then suddenly there you are in, the biggest arena of all. And it was sink or swim. You either completely cocked it up and were never heard of again, or you managed to survive. And I was lucky to not to bump into the furniture too much. And
well, you're famed for this, calm, laid-back presenting style. That must have, served you well. Have you developed that, or has it just been a natural thing for you? Is it a coping mechanism almost?
Yeah, well, it's drugs mainly.
Yeah.
Once they wear off at the end of the program, I've got all over the show. But it's
when the camera cuts.
To be honest, right at the start, everyone gets nervous, but when I went to Anglia, the nerves were a big problem, and also in radio. I remember I came in to do the sports news once in about 1975 at LBC, and you do sports news on the half hour, and they got the main presenter of the program and his guest there, and I think it was about the third bulletin I did. I walked in the door and I hadn't been listening to the program. And I heard the presenter say, right, we'll have more from our guest in a moment. But first of all, here's Steve Ryder with the sports news, and you sit down. And I looked up Michael Parkinson. I said, bloody hell. And, this was when Parky was, at the top of the tree, and I nearly died. And, and then when I went to Anglia, I did a couple of, I think my first live insert into the program. My parents came up and they went to the house where I was staying, so because you can't watch it anywhere else apart from going into the region. My parents came up to see my my debut, and I sat in the dressing room and I thought, this is awful. I physically cannot go on, can't do it. And 10 minutes before the start of the program, power cut. And the whole I did do just that, and it was
Saved by the bell. Yeah,
all the way through my career, it's not been a problem, because you take it as a reassurance that if you're not feeling nervous, then you don't really take the job too seriously. But talking of nerves, and you talk about people who are conquering their nerves. The most wound up person I ever worked with was Des Lynam.
Really?
Des was, we used to do Sports Personality of the Year, and Sue Barker and myself in the later years. And half an hour before the program, all you were doing was calming Des down, because everything was going to go wrong, this, that, and the other. Oh my, is it brandy and all that sort of thing? And we're all trying to, reassure him that, everything's going to be okay. And, it's only television and all that sort of thing.
Oh.
And then the three of us would walk out to do sport, and he would be, Des Lynam. Yeah. And we'd be in bits.
It's weird. You never hear about those sorts of things, obviously. And you see people like Des presenting, you're like, sorry, Les, and he exudes calmness. As you do. And I don't know whether it was an interview I watched with you or it was someone else, but they would talk about Murray Walker. I think it was you, actually. And, obviously Murray, when you listen to Murray commentate, it sounds like he's doing it all off the cuff and it's all amazing and he's just,
Yeah.
fully in the moment. But I'm pretty sure it was you that was saying this, that he has scripts that he goes over again and again and again and again,
Yeah.
and makes it look like he's doing it just in the moment. But in reality, he's been preparing and
well,
poring over
well, in
things.
fairness to Murray, he does do the proper stuff as well. But when we were doing the first few years of the Touring Car Championship, it was all post-produced, and so the commentary needed to be dubbed on after we'd finished the edit. So Murray took this as a chance to do it absolutely bang on, because the way we used to put the Touring Car Championship edits together, nobody could commentate on it, because it was just a crash fest of every single incident that happened around the circuit. And so Murray had to sit down and sort of create some sort of narrative that made sense of it all. But, he really sort of pushed the boat out. We had to put him up in a hotel overnight because he took 48 hours to do this.
Yeah.
And then he would dub it, and we would all have to sit there in the dubbing theatre with Murray and listen to the replay, very slowly and so on. But he was wonderful, and bless him, he really helped put the championship and motorsport on the map.
100%, an absolute hero. We'll come on to him more later. And let's fast forward a little bit. So 1985, you take over from Harry Carpenter as BBC presenter of Sports Night. And then I think the first time that I really became aware of you was in the 90s with Grandstand, which became this sort of institution that everybody loved. That must have been a great gig to get.
Well, it was, and it was a bit like that moment in 1980 where you parachuted in to do the Olympics. There was a feeling, I'd done World of Sport with ITV from 80 to 85 and bits and pieces and so on. But there was always a feeling that the BBC is where you needed to be if you wanted to make progress in sports broadcasting. So my agent said, why don't we, just flag up a lunch with the boss, and we'll all meet each other. And we met in this hotel in Park Lane. Jonathan Martin and John Rosen, who was the editor of Sports Night. And he was always a man of few words, Jonathan. And before even the menus had arrived, he said, right, nice to meet you. He said, we want you to take over from Harry Carpenter on Sports Night within 4 or 5 months. We want you to eventually take over the golf presentation from Harry Carpenter. We want you immediately to do a minimum of 25 editions of Grandstand a year. Alongside Des Lyman. And he said, bloody hell. And, there was no discussion or anything like that. And he said, you'll probably want to talk about money. He said, but Harry was with us for 25 years and never had a contract. And, we anticipate that you'll be the same. And, 10 years I never had a contract. And, and off you go. And, there was that sort of longevity. But the great thing about Grandstand, which was the initial program that I was lucky enough to work on, is that if you're a presenter, it is like a smorgasbord of material just passes by you every weekend, and you can take your pick of what you want. If you want to relate to rugby in particular, or you feel a particular empathy for motorsport or cricket, then the ingredients are there for you to get more and more involved. And for me, it was a connection that I already had with motorsport, that you were able to develop that through Grandstand. But nowadays, if you're going into sports broadcasting, the options are huge, but in a way it's far more diluted. If you want to be a presenter, the first question is, well, do you want to be a motorsport presenter? Do you want to be a cricket presenter? There is no opportunity existing now for you to present everything. And for 10 years, we had just lived the life. One weekend you're doing Wimbledon, the next weekend the British Grand Prix, then you're off to the Olympics, pop back for the Open, and so on. It doesn't happen anymore, but I was just in the very, very lucky position of being a presenter at a time when the BBC was absolutely dominant in terms of what it owned.
Do you think that it's right that sports broadcasting is a little bit more diluted, I suppose? Because I suppose look at Sky, they want their one presenter to be so focused on that rather than having spread all around, Sky's coverage of whatever it is or whatever broadcaster. I think there's sides for both of it, but interested to get your thoughts.
Well, yeah, it is. You do become absorbed in one particular area. And I remember when I eventually went from the BBC back to ITV in 2005, I had an offer from ITV to come back and just specifically do Formula One. Mm-hmm. And that appealed to me because, despite what I said, 20 years of doing absolutely everything, being an expert on rugby one week and an expert on, taekwondo the next is a bit wearing. Yeah. So I thought it would be great to come back and throw everything at one sport. So I did appreciate that, but it is the fact that, that option doesn't exist anymore. And you fear for people. And it was a lesson, not a lesson that I learned, but it was an experience that I had, that when you go back to ITV, you throw your heart and soul into being a Formula One presenter. 4 years later, they lose the contract.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're not, where are you going? And the next outlet has got its team in place and you're starting all over again.
Yeah. It feels like on radio, there's still a little bit of it. There are certain radio presenters who seem to move across different sports a little bit more. And there's one or two, I guess, on TV who have dabbled in different sports, but not at the same time, like Jake Humphrey moving around from F1 and football, and Vernon Kay. I think he did American football at one point, and now Formula E and so on. So it's interesting how people flit about. Let's focus a little bit on the motorsport side of things then. So obviously we all know you from British touring cars, but also Formula One. Do you have a preference with those two types of motorsport? Is there one that you enjoy working on more than the other?
I love the Touring Car Championship, and I was lucky enough. I keep saying lucky enough, but it's true. I was lucky enough to be, around Colin Chapman and Lotus at the end of the 70s, which was a fantastic era, 70s into the 80s, a fantastic era of Formula One. I have to admit, when I came back to Formula One in 2005, having left it, in broadcast terms in 96 when the BBC lost the contract, came back in 2005. And you had the excitement of Lewis Hamilton, but the corporate structure and the uniformity of the sport just left me cold. And, everything was micromanaged and so on. And that's not a criticism. It was just myself contrasting that with the experience of wandering around the paddock and being able to walk into any motorhome and talk to any driver and, and just be a lot closer to the sport than you were able to do in modern times. Touring Car Championship is a sort of recreation of that kind of atmosphere. Everyone is approachable and nobody is particularly full of themselves.
We certainly found that, didn't we? We went to Donington last year. I think it was the first time I've actually been to a British touring car race, and the freedom you got was, I'd only ever experienced Formula One previously at being in a pit lane, and it was. I was like, I don't think we're allowed in here. Like, I think, who do we have to ask? I think, no, I don't think, no, come on in. It's fine. Have a look at the car. Do you want to chat to this guy? Yeah, he's free. Let's do it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. But that freedom just makes for way more entertaining, more relevant broadcasting, I think.
It does. And it helps develop the personalities and and so on. And it's, but that was how it was in 83, 84. And, I remember when we used to go down and, Nigel Mansell was in his prime, and he would have a motorhome parked in the infield with a white picket fence around it, and sit in his deck chair just talking to people on a Saturday afternoon after qualifying.
Brilliant.
It was just, no sort of, burdensome timetable of media interviews or sponsor this and sponsor that and so on. But you can't hark back to the old days.
Do you what do you think of Formula One today?
I think, from my point of view, I would love it to become a little bit more human. I think it needs to be rationalized. I think I think the experience of the virus of the last few months has concentrated a lot of people's minds, and it's concentrated it in terms of at last getting the cost cap through, and that is essential because you can admire the investment of a Mercedes or a Ferrari, and you can admire the kind of technology that is the result of that. But if you haven't got a race, then the whole product is meaningless. And unless you can preserve the back half of the grid and make the thing sustainable, not only for the grandees who have dominated the sport, but for the new teams and the new organizations who want to come in. It's like promotion and relegation in football. You've got to have that competitive structure. So I think it's moving back in the right direction. And I think Liberty have come in with a few interesting ideas. I think they needed a little bit more guidance than they've had, but I think they're starting to get things right. But I would like to see a smaller schedule. I would like to see the whole sport becoming a little bit more relaxed. And I know it's never going to be, it's always going to be a slave to budgets and expenditure and so on. But if that can be dismantled just a little, and if somebody can think also about the show, about the weekend of the Grand Prix, is it enough to see cars trundling around in a rather dispiriting way on a Friday when you got 45,000 people there?
Yeah.
You really can't shoehorn anything else into a Saturday. It needs a show.
Yeah.
And the Touring Car Championship is a very different animal, and it's unfair to compare the two, because one is much more sort of nimble and flexible and so on. But you like to think that a Sunday on a touring car weekend is value for money.
That's just what I was thinking. It sounds like you get way more value for money with British touring cars than you do Formula One. And yes, you can't compare because they are two different sports, but they're both motorsport, and they both have fans that attend cars going around tracks. So there's what's going on here.
Yeah. But the chorus that surrounds F1 is whereas we know who the champion is going to be, the winner is going to be, where are the surprises and so on. That is becoming louder and louder, and I think it needs to be addressed. You've got a top man there who's trying to drive it on in Ross Brawn. You've got an army of marketing people at St James who are doing God knows what, but it's but that's another story. But,
it feels like it's starting slowly to head in the right direction. And I think over the next couple of years, like you say, with the budget cap, which is considerably lower than some of the bigger teams would probably like, is going to make a difference. The new aero package that's coming in 2022 will hopefully make the racing more interesting. So touch wood, they can do something. And it is difficult when you're dealing with such big names like Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren, and getting everyone to buy into ideas and get things pushed through is a challenge.
Yeah. One thing, I wasn't going to drone on about it because I'm famous for it, but the one thing where I do still relate to F1 in terms of the work we're trying to do, because I come from the 70s, because I come from the 80s, I remember through the 80s, after Bernie took over, every time you went into a pit lane with a camera on your shoulder, you'll be recording fantastic stuff. That all is piled up at Biggin Hill. And I've been trying to convince Liberty and various other people involved in FOM that there is about 30,000 hours of Formula One related material, non-race material, that has never been researched, never been touched. And the stories that could be told from that archive are just unbelievable. And
I totally agree. And actually, I was at a conference. Where was it? I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was a Black Book or one of those. I'm not sure. And you were interviewing one of the top guys from Sky, and you gave him a really, really rough ride about that. And he was really sort of trying to dodge the question and didn't really give an answer. But
I can't understand why. What the objections are to actually being creative with this material. So what we've done, and in particular because of the fact that it's the 70th anniversary of the Formula One World Championship, a major documentary was commissioned by FOM, which hasn't been delivered. because they couldn't. They couldn't get into the Biggin Hill archive really, and they couldn't really access everything that happens before 1981 because that's, the rights are held elsewhere. So we went to the BBC and said, do you know what you've got in your archive from 1950 through to 1981? And they said, well, it's not very much, and it's not worth researching. I said, well, can we research it? And they were a little bit reluctant because nobody really takes that approach to BBC archive research. And we went in there 4 or 5 months ago, and we've identified probably over 300-400 hours of F1 material from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which the BBC are now turning into a 3-part documentary next year. But it is the complete story of the formation of the Formula One World Championship, not just race, but it is all the old programs that, tell the story of, Ken Tyrrell and all the old wheelbase programs, and which had never been seen since the day they were transmitted.
Wow.
So we're working to bring all that on stream into the market. We put a thing on the BBC website just a few weeks ago with on the anniversary of the 1950 British Grand Prix. An old newsreel that we found telling the story of the first Silverstone Grand Prix. And I know footage is around of, the 1950 British Grand Prix, but this was the complete newsreel production.
Oh, wow.
Which had never been seen. That's still up there on the BBC website, but it's...
Check it out. Well, it makes it even more frustrating that Sky won't give up what they've got hidden away in the vaults there.
Well, it's not Sky, it is FOM. And, I'm loath to be too critical because they've got so much on their plate.
And you need it.
Yeah. But, when, we've had long discussions about it, let's just put it like that. And I think that hopefully now that they see what is available from a different source, i.e. the BBC, starting to take that material seriously, hopefully it'll be the trigger for them to think, oh, hang on, because this is the material that that gave us the Senna documentary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, this is the producers of Senna went into the Biggin Hill archive at the invitation of Bernie for some reason, and they were working on a half-hour, maybe 45-minute television feature, and they came away with a 3-hour feature film, which, because the material they found was such a surprise and of such good quality. But that's where we're.
Well, we've got to keep prodding. You've got 2 more advocates here, so we'll prod as well. One day we'll get there. Now, listen, Mr. Ryder, this is the most important part of the show here. Very, very important. We have a very competitive quiz, and I will hand over to my esteemed colleague to introduce you to MotorMouth.
Go on.
Mr. Steve Ryder, welcome to MotorMouths, the hardest quiz in motorsport. There is a leaderboard of over 20 people we've subjected to this quiz.
Right.
There are 13 points up for grabs, okay?
Right.
And the quiz questions are all related to you and your career. So hopefully that stands you in a good chance of getting the answers right. But it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, okay. I'll just get Wikipedia up. And
it's not going to help you, I'm afraid, especially if it says you're born in Dartford. I don't believe any of that. So we've got 4 clips that we're going to play you, which hopefully you'll be able to hear. And then have a listen to the clips. And a bit like Question of Sport style, I'll then ask you a couple of questions about the clips afterwards. Okay, shall we start with clip number 1?
Yeah. Here we go.
It's good and it's the right thing to be positive about the BBC when you leave. I mean, when I told the BBC to piss off, I forgot to say all that stuff, and I found the way back very difficult. But you must be very proud of what's been achieved over the last 3 years, I'm sure.
Okay, Steve, what were you talking about there?
God knows. It was probably... Was it Autosport Awards?
Correct. That is 1 point in the bag.
It was Autosport Awards. I was probably talking to, and we used to have a good old spar, to Martin Brundle or Mark Blundell.
I'll go with your first answer.
Yeah. All right. Can I bring on a prop here?
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely, go for it. I'll give you the point for talking to Martin Brundle.
Right.
We'll forget about
And
Blundell.
surely a bonus point for a prop.
And a bonus point for a prop.
Never been done
Oh,
before.
it's a proper taking it off the wall. Careful.
The prop that I can't get off the wall.
Oh, no.
Glued on.
How did I manage to get? Oh well, anyway, it was a very nice cover of Autosport. That can you see that around there? I can't do all that.
Yeah, it's in picture. We can see it.
It was a cover of Autosport that they were very kind enough to do for me after 25 years of the Autosport, and it's signed by Sebastian Vettel and everyone else. And I had such great fun doing that. We did 28 years.
Wow.
Of the Autosport Awards, and it was a unique occasion, and a lot of good memories from that.
You enjoy a good spar on stage with people, don't you?
We used to have a set piece. I mean, I was never really sort of up for it, but then some things you just can't resist. But but I remember, Martin Brundle was always a bit of a sort of set piece. And Christian Horner was the one that, you would come on with a lot of sort of serious points that you wanted to make with Christian, and he would have his own agenda.
I bet.
Winding up, and what can we go in this direction or that direction, and so, but the best ever was Vettel. The first year he came, and he insisted on coming every year, even though every year he was world champion, even though every Sunday night that we had the Autosport Awards clashed with the German Sports Personality of the Year Awards. And he opted out every year from the German Sports Person and came to the Grosvenor. And but the first time, I mean, how old was he when he first came? Probably about 21.
I should know this. Early
20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah, I was at this one. It was the first time I saw Sebastian Vettel's personality.
Well, exactly, because you're world champion and you're getting the top billing, you're the last on the stage. And Sebastian, at that young age, he's probably changed, didn't drink, but thought he might give it a go this night. He was sitting there for about 3 hours and eventually got up on the stage about 11:10. And it was like the worst best man speech you've ever heard.
Oh, no.
But he was terrific, and he was doing impersonations. We couldn't get it. Was wonderful.
It's very funny. He's a funny guy.
20 minutes. But the great thing about the Autosport Awards was that it was like a sort of club night. You got the FIA gala, and you got these awards where everyone needs to be on their best behavior. But here there was, it wasn't going anywhere at that stage, although every sort of recording device seemed to be switched. And people could just let their hair down and have some fun and say what they really thought and so on. And I loved doing it, and but all things change anyway.
Well, it always looked like an amazing event. For one final point on that clip we played you, could you tell me the year in which you were talking to Martin Brundle?
I would say 1997.
Oh, no. You're way out. You are way out.
Oh,
2011. Really? 2011. You're talking to him about taking over, Sky taking over the BBC's F1 coverage.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Still,
it's a difficult one, that, for me, because, I think I told the BBC to piss off, I think, every year on that stage. So.
I think there should be a best bits on YouTube of Steve Ryder's roasts, because there's so many.
I think it's a program ready to be made. Okay, Tim, shall we have clip number 2?
Here it comes.
Have a listen to this.
Apart from the 2 retirements in Malaysia, a lot of really encouraging ingredients from the Williams point of view.
Yeah. Oh, not easy.
Tough one. Do you want to hear it again?
No, I heard it, but yeah.
Again?
It's definitely me.
It is.
Yes, that's you. Who are you talking to?
He's struggling, isn't he? He's struggling.
Definitely.
Shall I give it to you one more time?
No, that won't help. I'm trying to think. It's probably 2007.
Close. Very close.
2008.
Further away.
Other way.
There you go.
Yes.
Mark Webber?
Oh,
Yes. Yes. Correct.
There.
You're talking to Mark Webber. Absolutely. And for a final point, can you tell me where? It's what country are you talking to him in?
Well, Malaysia was a bit of a clue, wasn't it?
Oh, Sorry, I think I froze there for a minute. My internet's playing up a little bit. I'll repeat that question again for the sake of the audio. What country were you talking to Mark Webber in?
Well, I mentioned Malaysia.
Yes.
But is it not Malaysia?
You're talking about Malaysia.
Could it have been Bahrain?
Oh, afraid not. Australia.
Of course, we started in Malaysia, didn't we?
Yeah, so it was the race after. Yeah. But again, solid, consistent effort. 2 out of 3 again. So very consistent. Your streaks ahead of Karun Chandok already. So that's great.
That's not
Clip. Penultimate clip for you. Clip number 3. Have a listen to this.
this is tough. Here we go.
He's in the way of Alan Menu and he's not moving over. Menu hits him. Cox goes through. He's going to try and take the lead.
I think this is quite hard.
Any idea what's happening there?
Could you play it one more time?
Sure.
Yeah.
He's in the way of Alan Menu and he's not moving over. Menu hits him. Cox goes through. He's going to try and take the lead.
If you get any of this, I'll be so impressed.
The hard question.
It's not Mansell or Donington, is it?
No.
No.
It is. I'll give you a clue. It's touring cars.
Oh, I know that. Yeah.
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 Very early days touring cars.
Very early. Are we 93 at Silverstone?
Oh no, but if you go a few years, what did you say? 93. A few years later.
Play it again. I'm trying to
play it again. Go on. Have a listen.
Okay,
have a listen. Have a listen to the names in particular.
Yeah.
Here we go.
He's in the way of Alan Menu and he's not moving over. Menu hits him. Cox goes through. He's going to try and take the lead.
Alan Menu. What a ledge.
Is it Thruxton?
Oh no. It's Brands Hatch.
Oh right. Yeah. Well. Yeah.
No.
It was the thing that threw me. Cox takes. Is that Charlie Cox takes the lead?
It must be because it's Alan Menu
Yeah.
in the lead, and he is being on the final lap, and he's being held up by Revelia, who is the teammate of Cox, in an effort to help Cox get the win. So that's what I was looking for there, I'm afraid.
Good.
So and that was in 96.
96. All right, I'll give you that. But it's Charlie, dear old Charlie was. He went on to become commentator, of course.
Yes, of course.
Charlie Cox, and was very influential in a lot of sort of radio stuff and so on. And he's an all-round good bloke. But he had the biggest touring car crash I've ever seen. That was at Thruxton.
Really? I haven't seen that.
Yeah, end over end on the approach to the chicane. Look it up. I forgot what year it was.
I'll look it up.
I'm
afraid that gets you no extra points, though. So tough round, that one. That was a tough question, though, to be fair. Okay, final clip before the bonus question. So final clip. Let's play it to you now.
This evening, 2 places remain to be claimed in the 5th round of the FA Cup. We'll be concentrating in particular on events at Upton Park, West Ham and Swindon, and also upcoming events in Las Vegas. Nothing for Lloyd Honeyghan to regain, but a lot to hang on to. We set the scene from Vegas for Saturday's big fight. Honeyghan's defence, Marlon Starling's world title challenge.
What are you doing there?
I was killing him by the sound of it. That was good stuff.
Sounds good.
I would say we're on Sports Night.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can you tell me what year?
Lloyd Honeyghan. We are.
Yeah, try to leave you some hints there.
I would say 87. 86.
Oh no, higher.
88.
One more.
89.
There we go. 89. Because and I'm going to give you the point because of all the wider context you've been able to give as well. Brilliant. Yeah, that was, of course, you introducing the headlines on Sports Night in 1989. So I'm going to give you 3 out of 3 for that one. So a strong end because I'm very generous. Yeah. Your bonus question is this. Approximately how many points did Colin Turkleton collect to win the 2019 British Touring Car Championship?
Another tough one.
I'll give you approximately. So I'll allow within 10.
Yeah, that's fair. I get to play my favourite sound in a second.
140.
Oh, nope. You're way off. You are way off. 320. Yes.
Of course, you know, the reason I struggle with that, yeah, but on the touring car coverage, you know, we do it all from the pit lane.
Yeah.
And we have a tiny little monitor which a guy carries around on a pole, and I can't read the bloody thing. And so I never know who's on pole or who's got how many points or whatever. It's
far too many excuses, Ryder. Far too many excuses.
I do. Yeah.
Well, a racing driver excuses.
Points and things.
Well, Steve Ryder, I can tell you on our leaderboard, I'm afraid with 7 points, you've been pipped just by Tom Chilton, who is in 20th place with 8 points. You slot underneath in 21st place with 7 points. Not last, though. It's out 25, so you're all right. And you're just ahead of Jack Aitken as well, Williams F1 reserve driver. So, you know, some decent names to be around. And that is our overall leaderboard. Season 3 leaderboard, though, which is what podcast season we're in, that places you in 10th spot. Out of 11. So
I've got so much more to remember than these young.
No, you see, David Coulthard gave us the exact same excuse, and I corrected him by saying that Mark Blundell is up there in double points figures. So yes, he is. Actually, where is he on my? He is sixth.
Is he?
So there are no excuses, I'm afraid. None. But
give me Mark Blundell's questions then.
Yeah. Oh dear, Steve, thank you so much for playing the MotorMouth MotorMouth podcast. That's not the game. Thank you so much for playing MotorMouth.
Well done, Steve. Good effort. Now listen,
I'd have done a lot better, by the way, if I'd had to name how many points Mark Blundell got in the Touring Car Championship.
Yeah. We'll play that back to him.
So, Steve, I guess over the years you've interviewed I don't know how many hundreds of people. Can you put your finger on one of those horrible interviews where you just wanted the ground to swallow up and think, just get me away from this guy? What a disaster.
Not really. Because that would be very rude to
Yeah.
I remember, Scandinavians are always a bit of a challenge. And I remember Stig Blomqvist once on the stage at the Autosport Awards didn't seem to be able to summon up a single meaningful answer, and that was a bit of a struggle. No, I don't think. Jack Nicklaus was always, unless you started off on the right foot with Jack Nicklaus, he would bury you, and so you really had to know what you were talking about. But in the end, we had some. No, I wouldn't say. I mean, there are some in interviews that you just know aren't going to deliver anything of any great consequence, but there are others that are a challenge, but when you get them right, they are fantastic. And the two that I would pick out as if your next question is going to be who are your favorite,
pretty much, yeah.
From golf, Seve Ballesteros, and of course Ayrton Senna. And they both had the similar sort of Latin temperament and the sort of broken English that sometimes makes an answer even more effective than if you deliver it in the Queen's English. And Senna had a way of putting things, and Seve had a way of putting things that you just went, oh, wow. And there's just so much charisma and so much electricity there. And Senna in particular was amazing. My favourite.
Could you feel that with Senna? I mean, the only comparison I can make is I've been lucky enough to meet Lewis Hamilton a couple of times, and I got this sort of sense of he was incredibly intense, and you knew he was there. And I know people of a certain standing carry a bit of an aura anyway, but I could really feel, he shook my hand hard, he stared into my eyes, he was very intense. What sort of vibe did you get from Senna when you met?
It was just the impression that you got is no matter, and I was lucky enough almost always to be able to interview Senna one-to-one in a fairly controlled location. And in those circumstances, unlike anyone else you ever talked to, you just felt that every question you asked him, to him, was the meaning of life. And, he would answer it. There is no such thing as a sort of throwaway question and a throwaway answer. And the instance I always quote, we went to Estoril at the start of, I can't remember which season, with McLaren. And they'd had a great season the year before, and they were just launching their new car, getting it out on the track at Estoril for the first time. And McLaren got on to us and said, would you come out and do some interviews and so on for Sports Night and so on? Yeah. So we went over, and Senna was in the car, and he did a few laps, and he came back in for a debrief, and we sort of waited around, nothing. 1 hour, 2 hours. And then the light was starting to go, so we had to move up into the press area. And another hour went past, and we're on the flight out at this point. And eventually we just sort of reached the cutoff where we just can't do the interview anymore. And the door came open, and there was Joe Ramirez, the manager of Senna at McLaren, and Senna. And they came in, well, very sorry we're late, very sorry we're late. And Senna came and sat down, and we were so pushed for time that as he was doing the mic up, we just went into the first throwaway question. Ayrton, first time in a new car, what's your verdict? And so on. And this is my first time in a new car. He said, I haven't sat in the car since October. He said, in November and December, my team worked very, very hard. They worked through the night. They worked 24. They worked through Christmas and into the new year, hour upon hour. And he said, they have made no progress whatsoever. and Joe Ramirez in the background, oh no. And off he went. You asked me the question, I will tell you.
Yeah.
And that's the contrast you get these days. It would be the PR speak kind of answer, but it obviously led him into some sort of curious territory when he started, talking about, other things that were happening around the circuit. Wonderful, what amazing charisma.
I bet. And you've to meet these people, to chat with them. You've had an amazing and versatile career as well. Outside of motorsport, outside of broadcasting, do you have any hobbies, any interests that you tend to do while at home?
No, we've got a super grandchild that we're looking after, and I tend to empathise with everything that lies ahead there as well. And no, I do a bit of running as much as possible, and try to keep a lot of golf, play a lot of golf, and
Good.
Everything that you meant to do as well.
I was going to say, I was shocked when I found out you were 70. I was actually shocked because you don't look it at all.
Not shocked enough to keep it quiet though, but
yeah.
I can edit that out for you.
You're obviously amazing at broadcasting. We all know that. What are you crap at? What are you useless at?
I don't. Well, yeah. Well, I'm useless at anything to do with cars. Strangely enough, I am. If you have a karting evening, I'm always last. If I get in the car, if I get any kind of chance to have a performance car experience, I'm dreadful. And the one time that was underlined was when I stuffed Ricard Rydell's Volvo into the gravel at Clearways.
Excellent work. And
there've been a few other instances of that, but I've been invited to go on sort of endurance rallies and this. I can't think of anything. The actual driving, I would be hopeless. Having said that, I was lucky enough to do a bit of co-driving. I say do a bit of co-driving, sit alongside.
Yeah.
Not quite like the rally co-driving.
Well, it is. No,
it is the same. Okay.
Yeah, when back in the, how are we doing for time? Because I can drone on forever.
Right.
No, we've got as much time as you have.
All right. Well, back in the early 80s, I had a deal with, or an arrangement with Shell. And I do a little column for Autosport. And they said, well, why don't we get you out in the field and, you know, do some competitive motorsport? And Pentti Aricola was their top driver, who lived locally to me. And he said, well, why don't you come and co-drive for me on the Audi International in Wales, which was the precursor to the RAC. And he said, the important thing is that, you know, we just have a laugh, have some fun, you know, good old crack. And I said, well, you know, if it's on that basis, that's fine. I said, where do I turn up? And he said, well, we'd start in Aberystwyth. So come to Aberystwyth on the Friday night, and it's a one-day event. But we'll have some fun, you know. So I turn up in Aberystwyth, and they're all in the bar, and a good night was had. And I eventually said about 10:30, you know, what's the schedule for tomorrow? And he said, oh, you know, his wheels up at about 6:30, I'm afraid. He said, but, you know, don't take it too seriously. He said, we're just going to have some, we'll have a laugh. You know, it's not important. And so I went to bed with a few beers, and I thought, well, you know, we're going to have a laugh. And I came down the next morning at 6:30, and Pentti was sitting at the table facing the wall on his own. And he was wrapping tape around his hands slowly like this. And he looked across at me, and I had a thumping head, and he looked across at me, he said, we can win this. And you got Michel Mouton, and you got Tony Pond in the 6R4, and my God, it was one of the longest, it was one of the most thrilling days. I mean, the car was just sideways all the way around. I think we came third, and I took the wrong exit at the first roundabout coming out the hotel, and wasn't allowed to make any other contribution. So it was just watching him all, and it was sensational. It was a sensational
experience. Amazing experience.
That was in you remember the old Telecom Astra? Good car.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good old days.
Steve, what would you tell your 16-year-old self now?
I think if you're one-on-one with Bill Oddie at the Valley in front of 18,500, get down quicker.
That's the best advice we've had so far.
Yeah.
We have 3 final questions for you, Steve. Quick fire questions. I'll kick it off, Harry, if that's all right.
Go for it.
What's got you excited at the moment?
Excited. Well, people will laugh at the thought of me getting excited about anything, but what has really, excited, The Last Dance on Netflix, Michael Jordan.
Yes, I want to see this.
Never being a basketball, but, you know, I've been aware of basketball, but yeah, Beta Path to The Last Dance, Netflix, brilliant. And it's a sports documentary. It's not a basketball documentary. It's about motivation and strength of personality and everything else. But that's what's got me going.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Cool.
If not broadcasting, presenting, what would you be doing?
If not broadcasting, presenting, I'd like to have been a producer. You know, a lot of the stuff that we did, I got involved in the production side when we were doing the Legend series for Sky F1. You know, a lot of the production element of that was I got involved in. But I would have loved to have played a musical instrument, and production. I did you probably haven't got time for another long story, but it's I did when I was at LBC, we all had to do everything, and you know, you might relate to this in your environment. And so one day you'd be doing sports presenting shifts, and then another day production. So I was producer on this particular day. Do you remember? You wouldn't remember, but we had a breakfast morning program which was hosted by Bob Holness.
Yeah, I remember Bob.
Bob and Dougie Cameron, and we're sorting ourselves out at 6 o'clock. They're the other side of the glass, and I'm the producer. And something had happened. A bomb had gone off in Seville, and we need to get some reaction. It's a Basque thing or something like that. And we had no contacts or whatever. And anyone got any number for Reuters or anything? And Bob Holness came on. He said, my mate Angus lives in Seville. He's a journalist. He'll give you a line. He gave me his phone number. And I rang Angus, and there he was. And I said, oh, it's the AM program, Bob Holness. And something happened. And he got more or less straight cued onto air, this guy. And I sort of sat back, and Bob said, Angus, it's Bob Holness in the London studio. And he goes, Bob, he said, I haven't heard from you in about 30 years. He said, how's the wife? He said, remember those? And Bob's going, yes, what I'm ringing about is the bomb explosion in Seville. What bomb's that, old boy? It just went on and on. And I got a serious bollocking that, before you put anyone on, you explain to them exactly what's required of them.
Yeah. I was the wife.
What I should have said to you at the start of this, actually.
I'm presuming she still hasn't given birth to a child downstairs. I'll find out in a few minutes.
Yeah, she has. I mean, they're very capable.
Well, we're having a home birth anyway, so does it really make a difference if I'm there or not? Not particularly.
Good for you.
It'll be fine. Final question for you, Steve, then we'll let you get on with your day. What are you scared of?
I'm just scared. I'm not sure. Well, no sort of phobias or anything, but I'm like any broadcaster. I think Des has the same dreams, and I don't know what kind of dreams Sue Barker has, but every broadcaster has, especially in a live environment, has the dream where you usually stark naked as well. You're about 30 seconds to on air, and you've got no idea what the program is, no idea what the script is, and so on. But I'm not afraid of being found in those circumstances, because I think the touring car boys would look after me enough if I was
about to go on air with no clothes on.
Paul O'Neill probably wouldn't notice, but I think I get the tip off from Tim anyway.
Lovely stuff. Well, listen, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us.
Pleasure.
It's been great hearing from you, hearing some of the old stories and some of the names as well that we haven't heard about for a long time. Really interesting. And touch wood, all this lockdown business gets taken away soon, and we can get back to racing. And in fact, it won't be long, I suppose. August 1st, 2nd is the first.
Yeah, first weekend in August. I think we're cramming 27 races into 8 weeks or something like that.
Okay, cool. Oh, Harry, we'll have to make our way.
We'll have to get there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Steve Ryder, thank you so much for coming on the MotorMouth podcast.
Thank you very much, and all the best to you with the events of the next few hours as well. Hope it all goes.
Thanks so much. Cheers, Steve.
Okay, cheers.